The docking clamp released with a sound like a gunshot, and General Adeyemi grabbed the nearest handhold before her body had decided to. She held on for a moment, 3 heartbeats, maybe 4, while the Times Accord's Promise Times settled into its berth aboard the Veth Imperial Station, and then she let go and straightened her jacket. It was a human jacket. The Veth had not offered her a ceremonial robe, which meant either they did not know she was coming, or they had decided, in their immaculate and ancient way, that she did not merit one. She suspected the latter. The airlock cycled open. The smell hit her first. Cold mineral water. And something else. Something she didn't have a word for. Like ozone, if ozone had been filtered through stone for 600 years. The corridor beyond the lock was carved, actually carved, not printed from pale greenish rock that pulsed faintly with embedded bioluminescence. The ceiling was low enough that she had to duck, and this, she knew, was deliberate. Veth architecture tilted toward the floor. They built for the gravity they were born under. Heavy, close. A world that held its children tight. Her own spine protested immediately. 2 Veth waited at the end of the corridor. They were shorter than she'd expected from the briefing vids, though shorter wasn't quite right, more times compressed, as if whoever designed them had taken all the height a human would have and pressed it sideways. Their 4 eyes caught the bioluminescence in sequence, top to bottom. A flicker, she would later learn, was called Times Vel, the involuntary blink of acknowledged attention. Their skin was the gray-green of deep-sea water. They wore no uniforms, but the markings across their collarbones told Adeyemi everything the uniforms would have said, if she could read them. She couldn't. That was why she was here. General Adeyemi, the one on the left, spoke. It's times her. The briefing said Veth chose pronouns the way humans chose what to eat for breakfast. Situationally, her voice had a wet resonance to it, like sound produced in a larger chest than the one visible. You were expected on the 4th cycle of the quiet tide. This is the 7th. The docking clamp failed on approach, Adeyemi said. We had to reroute through the secondary berth. I apologize for the delay. Juam. A pause. Both pairs of eyes flickered Vel again, twice this time. Out of sync. Something passed between them that was not speech. The Times Accord's Promise Times is a human vessel, the other Veth said. It was not a question. Yes. We were given to understand a diplomatic conveyance would be provided. This was the first test, Adeyemi understood. This was them watching her, the way you'd watch a strange animal that has wandered into your yard, with your hands at your sides, and your face very still. She had been in enough rooms like this to know that how she answered in the next 4 seconds would set the texture of the next 6 months. The Galactic Assembly provided a conveyance, she said. I chose my own ship. The Times Accord's Promise Times has been in service for 31 years, and I know every sound she makes. I prefer to arrive in something I trust. The Vel flickered again. The Veth on the left, Times Mediary Esaveth. That was the title the briefing file had attached to her image, tilted her head by 4 degrees. It was not a human gesture and did not mean what it would mean on a human face, but Adeyemi filed it anyway. Follow, said Esaveth, and turned. The corridor descended. The gravity increased in small, almost imperceptible increments, a slow tightening around Adeyemi's ankles and knees that she would feel for the next 3 days as a deep, grinding ache in her lower back. She walked steadily. She would not limp in front of them. Later, in private, she would take the pain medication she'd packed for exactly this reason, and feel slightly smug about her own foresight. The chamber they brought her to was enormous, ceilinged so high she couldn't see the top of it. Bioluminescence fading into blue-dark distance overhead. A feeling like standing at the bottom of an ocean trench and looking up. Around the room's curved walls, Veth sat in their floor-facing chairs, dozens of them, absolutely motionless in the way of a species that had never developed the human need to fidget. At the chamber's center, A low table. On the table, one document. It was printed on Veth material, something between paper and stone, with a warmth to it that surprised her fingers when she reached out. She stopped herself before she touched it. The gesture would have been presumptuous. "The terms you proposed," Esaveth said, "before the assembly removed you from your post, remain the foundation of this document." Adeyemi looked at her. The Veth's 4 eyes held steady the deliberate kind of stillness, not the natural kind. "You are aware that I am no longer the assembly's general," Adeyemi said carefully. "We are aware of what you are no longer." Esaveth's voice carried no inflection that Adeyemi could identify as anything in particular. "We are interested in what you remain." Adeyemi folded her hands behind her back. Outside the viewports, and there were no viewports, she realized. The walls were solid stone. 600 years of it, her ship waited in its berth, making the small sounds it made when it was settling and cooling, sounds she could identify with her eyes closed. She thought about those sounds. She thought about what it meant to bring the thing you trusted into a place you didn't yet. "Tell me what terms you find insufficient," she said, "and I'll tell you what I can offer instead." The Vel flicker moved through the assembled Veth like a wave. Something had shifted. She didn't know what, yet. But in 31 years of being in rooms where the rules were written in a language she hadn't learned, she had developed a sense for the moment when the room decided to take you seriously. This was that moment. Adeyemi's quarters were a cell carved from the same pale rock as everything else, furnished with a sleeping platform, approximately 80% of the way toward comfortable and one small container of water. She couldn't identify the temperature of by looking at it. She drank it anyway cold, tasting of stone and something almost green. Something growing, and sat on the platform's edge and opened her case. Her aide, Flores, had packed it for her with characteristic thoroughness. Pain medication, yes, and 3 changes of clothes. And a photograph of her daughter's school play from 6 years ago, which Adeyemi carried everywhere without fully understanding why. And a small bag of dried mango that Flores had hidden under the diplomatic correspondence file because Flores was, despite all evidence to the contrary, a person of genuine warmth. She ate a piece of mango. It was aggressively sweet in the mineral cold air. The negotiations had gone 3 hours before Esaveth's assistant, a young Veth named, improbably, Theseth, whose collar markings were still unset. Still shifting had indicated a break in the Veth way, by standing and leaving. Everyone had followed. Adeyemi had been escorted here. She was considering the first session's problems she'd catalogued, significant ones, not counting the 7 minor terminological disputes that would multiply like bacteria if she didn't address them early when the door produced a knock. Not a Veth knock. Veth didn't knock. They announced themselves through a complex subsonic vibration that, to human ears, was simply silence with a texture. Adeyemi opened the door. Theseth stood in the corridor, holding a covered tray. "Mediary Esaveth suggested you might not have eaten according to your biological schedule," Theseth said. Her voice was higher than Esaveth's, the resonance less settled. "Our food is not suitable for your chemistry. This was prepared aboard your vessel by your crew." Adeyemi looked at the tray. She looked at Theseth. The young Veth's eyes were moving, not Vel, not the formal flicker, but something quicker and smaller. And it took Adeyemi a moment to identify it as the visual equivalent of the thing humans did with their hands when they were nervous. "Thank you," Adeyemi said. Do you have time to sit for a moment? I have questions about the corridor markings that I don't want to ask in session." Theseth's eyes stilled. "The markings are not traditionally explained to," she began. "I know," Adeyemi said. "I'm not asking you to explain them. I'm asking whether you'd be willing to. There's a difference." She held the door open. "I also have dried mango." The silence lasted long enough that Adeyemi genuinely believed Theseth would refuse. Then the young Veth stepped across the threshold and arranged herself in the floor-oriented crouch, That was the Veth equivalent of sitting down, and Adeyemi closed the door and set the tray on the sleeping platform, and thought, "Good. The markings," Theseth explained, speaking carefully, clearly deciding as she spoke how much to say were relational rather than hierarchical. They didn't denote rank so much as time's obligation, what you owed to whom, and in what context. Esaveth's markings said she was obligated to the Emperor, to the station, to the memory of the 3 mediaries who had held her post before her, and unexpectedly to the continuation of the living document that was their legal tradition, not to any person, to the times thing. "That is why," Theseth said, with the slightly flattened tone of someone revealing something they hadn't planned to, "the Assembly's decision to remove you created a difficulty." Adeyemi paused with a piece of mango halfway to her mouth. "How so?" "The treaty language you proposed in the 3rd session 2 years ago included a human framework of obligation. Obligation to individuals. The Assembly. The human species. The mediary found it." Theseth paused. "It does not translate precisely. Vest to whole. Something like structurally incomplete, as if the document had no foundation." "Because I wrote it as a human would," Adeyemi said. "Because you wrote it as if the thing that mattered was who signed it," Theseth said. "We are not interested in who signs it." Adeyemi ate the mango. It was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a room, where 2 beings who breathe differently are both thinking. "What are you interested in?" she asked. Theseth's eyes made the nervous movement again. "Whether it will hold," she said. "When the signatories are gone. When the humans who stand behind this promise are not the humans who made it." She looked at Adeyemi with 4 eyes that Adeyemi was beginning to learn how to read. "We have signed 12 treaties with non-Veth species. 9 of them did not survive the first generation of successors." Adeyemi set the tray to one side. Outside the stone walls, she was aware of the station's hum different from her ship's hum, lower and more complex, the voice of a structure that had been running for 6 centuries. She was aware of it the way you're aware of breathing, not every second, but enough. "In the morning session," she said, "I want to try something with the obligation language, but I'll need you to tell me if I've got the framework wrong, because I'm going to be guessing, and I'd rather someone stop me before I say something that can't be unsaid." Theseth's eyes went absolutely still. The good kind of still, Adeyemi was beginning to understand. The kind that meant thinking was happening. "You are asking me to be your advisor," Theseth said. "I'm asking you to keep me from making errors that would embarrass us both," Adeyemi said. "You can decide whether that's the same thing." The young Veth stood unfolding from her crouch in one smooth motion that made Adeyemi's knees ache in sympathy, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "The corridor markings along the east passage," she said, "indicate the chambers of the historians. If you wish to ask them questions, they would not refuse you. Historians do not refuse questions. It is considered another pause. Vez to hall. Structurally incomplete." She left. Adeyemi sat for a moment with the empty tray and thought about obligation and completeness and the 9 treaties that hadn't survived and the 3 that had, and what the difference might be. Then she went to find the historians. The crisis announced itself at the 7th hour of the morning session, in the form of an aide who entered the negotiating chamber, bent to Esaveth's ear, and spoke in subsonic Veth that Adeyemi felt as a vibration in her back teeth. Esaveth did not visibly react. This, Adeyemi had learned in the past 4 days, was not a good sign. The Veth showed distress through a reduction in visible response, which was the biological opposite of most species Adeyemi had negotiated with. And the effect was deeply unsettling. The more alarmed Esaveth was, the more still she became. She was, currently, absolutely motionless. "Something has happened," Adeyemi said. She did not make it a question. "The Emperor's Third Council has requested a formal review of these proceedings." Esaveth's voice was level. He disputes the legitimacy of your mandate. Adeyemi had known this was coming. She had known it since the assembly had stripped her rank and handed her a civilian diplomatic designation that meant, in practical terms, that she was allowed to be in this room but had no binding authority to commit to anything, which was the diplomatic equivalent of inviting someone to dinner and then explaining they would not actually be eating. What she had not known was how quickly he would move. On what grounds? She asked, though she knew. You carry no formal commission. The assembly has not ratified your presence here. Under the terms of the Third Protocol of Recognized Intermediaries, HFY stopped. An almost imperceptible flicker. He argues that anything agreed here is non-binding, that we would be negotiating with a private citizen. The assembled Veth were all doing the stillness. The room felt like the inside of a held breath. Adeyemi looked at the document on the central table. It was thicker now than it had been on the first day. 4 days of work. The obligation language, restructured around the Veth concept of times. Verith times, not what you owe to a person, but what a thing owes to itself, to its own continuation. Thesith had corrected her framework twice and improved it 3 times. The historians had given her 2 frameworks she hadn't considered. The document was, she believed, actually good now. Better than what she'd written 2 years ago. Built to last. She stood. I need 1 hour, she said. I'd like to use the communications array in the Eastern Passage. The review proceeding has already been filed, HFY said. The Council's office will have received our acknowledgement this morning. I'm not going to contest the review, Adeyemi said. I'm going to call my daughter. The Vel moved through the room, not the deliberate diplomatic flicker, something else, something unguarded. You're the Seth. Behind and to the left, almost spoke. Stopped. She's 23, Adeyemi said. She's a water systems engineer on Meridian Station. She finds treaty negotiations incomprehensible and says so with great regularity. She picked up the document from the table carefully, both hands, and set it in front of HFY. I'd like to show you something in here before I make that call, if you have 5 minutes. HFY looked at the document. At Adeyemi. At the document. 5 minutes, she said. Adeyemi turned to the section she'd been carrying in the back of her mind since the second night, the section she'd rebuilt 4 times from first principles because the historians had said, with gentle academic precision, that every failed treaty they'd studied had failed at exactly this point. This clause, she said. The succession clause. I wrote it to the river. Thesith made a small, caught sound. You know that phrase. The oldest historian told me, a river doesn't care about the banks, Adeyemi said. It only cares about flowing. If you write the obligation into the banks, into the specific governments, the specific leaders, the assembly, the emperor, then, when the banks change, the river stops. She ran her finger along the clause. So I tried to write the obligation into the river, into the thing itself. The state of not war, the continuation of exchange. The treaty isn't between the assembly and the empire. It's between the idea that beings who breathe different air can still share a table, and the idea that they will keep doing so after everyone in this room is gone. HFY was absolutely still. Adeyemi waited. Through the stone walls, impossibly, she could hear nothing, no ship hum, no station hum, just the breath of rock that had been holding its shape for 600 years. This is why, HFY said slowly. You were removed from your post. Partly. Adeyemi set the document down. Partly it was because I kept asking for more time when the assembly wanted a signature. And partly it was because a treaty this durable doesn't serve the political interests of people who need to be re-elected. A peace that lasts 900 years doesn't need anyone tending it. Politicians find that inconvenient. HFY looked at the document for a very long time. Make your call, she said finally. 1 hour. Then we will discuss the succession clause. Adeyemi was at the door when Esaveth spoke again. "The council's review," she said. "It will be difficult to resolve." "I know," Adeyemi said.